Our next speaker is Ron Gerhard. He is our Vice Chancellor of Budget and Finance, and I know everyone's interested to hear about the money.
Good morning. Welcome back. Just a quick note to Matt. I think he left, but I'm a true believer in aromatherapy, and sitting right behind him, I'm very inspired this morning. So again, I'm Ron Gerhard. For those I have yet had the pleasure to meet, I'm the Vice Chancellor for Finance here within the Peralta colleges in the district office. Been here for about 2 years, and it's been quite a 2 years. It's been quite a journey to date. Kind of reflecting on it and some of the comments by Trustee Galasso this morning, and thinking of where we've come from in the last 2 years to where we are right now is very, in addition to Matt's aroma, very inspiring in terms of where we're at and the opportunities that lie ahead for us. So with that said, and framing today is, coming into this, I share cautioned optimism for moving forward. Not necessarily the exuberance that has been conveyed by previous speakers in terms of money and moving forward and what we can do, but cautioned optimism because those of us who've been in this a while, we can never anticipate what the state is going to throw at us next. So that being said, I've been asked to provide you with a update of the state of the district budget and all the colleges. So with that, I'm going to really speak to the 12-13 budget, where we're at with regard to two funds. The district has 20 different funds, but I'm going to speak to two directly this morning. The unrestricted general fund and the Measure B partial tax. Right now, those are the primary two funds that are supporting our operations of instruction and student services. And then I'm going to close out in providing you an overview of what the governor has put forward as his January budget proposal for next fiscal year, that being 13-14. And it's just a glimpse into what the governor is envisioning himself of what is going to be in his signed budget that he would like. But again, those of us who've been around know that the governor's January proposals very rarely look the same when he ultimately signs them, hopefully before July 1. So that being said, covering, next slide please. Covering the general assumptions that are covered in our budget, and kind of briefly go over these. They haven't changed from this presentation or discussion that we've had in August too much. But the general assumptions or primaries are the budget will be balanced, no deficit spending. In contrary, we're trying to build back our fund balance to a level that would, in the future, mitigate cuts that the state may throw at us. The adopted budget will have a reserve for contingency of 5%, which is the state required, and that we will use our planning documents and processes to form the expenditure budgets. Next slide. The revenue assumptions. Previous ongoing workload reductions proposed by the governors are incorporated or have been incorporated in the budget. What this essentially means is that we have and continue to incorporate the workload reductions that the state has imposed upon us for at least the last 4 budget years, going back to fiscal year 2009-2010. Since that time, we've had a workload reduction cumulatively of approximately 1,787 FTES. That's essentially funding cut for serving that equivalent amount of full-time equivalent students. To put it in perspective, looking at what the state had funded us prior to that time, that's at approximately a 10% cut, and approximately a 25% cut when you look at what the number of students that we're serving at a high point of in excess of 22,000 full-time equivalent students. So it has been significant, and the dollar value associated with that is approximately $8.5 million. We're anticipating this year a $15 million deferral from the state. For those who new to deferrals, is essentially state IOUs. It's money that the state ordinarily is obligated to pay us for serving students, generally between January and June. But withholding some of that and paying us back after the fiscal year is ended in July, and then some of it in October. General apportionment deficit factor, approximately 2%, and that's really a cautionary criteria, criteria, because uncertainty related to property taxes. Now, property taxes in the county of Alameda have stabilized. For the previous 2 years, there were some modest declines because of the softness in the housing market. But more recently, the housing market has come back and has been fairly stable or strong. But unfortunately, the state, how they fund us is that they don't necessarily look at County of Alameda's property tax tied to our revenue source, but the property taxes are combined into one general pot for the entire state. So if there are property tax shortfalls in other counties, in particular down in Southern California, that has or potentially has an impact upon us. And the state has somewhat a mantra in that regard, is that everyone shares and shares alike. The other piece of it is redevelopment. The state cut or abolished redevelopment agencies, and as a result, there's some question in terms of how much redevelopment, again, an offshoot of property taxes, we're really going to get compared to what the governor has envisioned. The next slide, enrollment growth. Right now, we are anticipating approximately a 1% enrollment growth. That's solely attributed to the great work everyone did around the state in terms of passing Prop 30 and its direct impact to our current year budget. But again, the enrollment growth is approximately 1%. It'll fund about 175 additional FTES. The dollar value of that is potentially an additional revenue of about $700,000. But again, putting in perspective, this is only the beginning step, if you will, of restoring back that 10% approximately that we've been cut during the previous 4 years. So really, we're rather than growth, it's more being characterized as restoration and getting back to where we were just 4 budget years ago. Cost of living adjustment is none slated. Target base credit FTS district-wide is approximately 18,500 FTS. Non-credit about 64 FTS. Anticipated property tax receipts, again, relatively flat compared to the prior year. And then lottery money, about $118 per FTS. Expenditure budgets, of course, meeting contractual obligations. We've already budgeted for and accounted for step and column increases. We've anticipated and budgeted for the employer contribution increase in retirement benefits for those who are PERS employees, and then maintaining district contribution to DSPS of the same amount that it's been or it was last year as well. The last slide on expenditure assumptions, any cuts, which right now in the governor's budget, in the budget right now, in the governor's budget in the future, don't have any planned or anticipated at this point in time cuts to either general fund or categoricals, but a core belief that restricted programs, grants, spend within their restricted dollars. Increase in medical premiums we've already accounted for, and that's helped us a lot. As mentioned before by Matt, the recent contract agreements, in particular related to the health benefits, have helped us a lot in terms of managing our budgets and having enough budgeted resource to pay for the increases in premiums that were dealt from Kaiser and CoreSource. Again, you may recall, initially last year we were looking at a potential premium increase from Kaiser of 18%. We were able to, through negotiations with both PFT and the other two unions, as well as directly with Kaiser, able to reduce that down from 18% to 11%, but even still 11% being a significant increase. OPEB increase, budgeted for that, and again, or lastly, the use of the allocation model. The Planning and Budget Council put forward a new resource allocation model that was approved by Chancellor Allen. We've recently implemented that and are in the process of fully implementing it, and using, given the lack of state resources, using the parcel tax to further that effort. Then the next slide, there's a lot of numbers here, but what I'm going to try to focus your attention on, if I could, is really the budget column, which is the second over from the left. The budget general fund, this is only the unrestricted general fund. It's the primary fund used to support our operations. Revenues from all sources of approximately $118.7 million. Expenditure budgets as they currently stand is approximately $114.7. A few key points that I wanted to point out is that, as had been previously mentioned by Chancellor Ortiz, is that in light of the passage of the parcel tax, we've placed in the budget for the colleges the hiring or funding of 21 new faculty positions. Those positions, I think for the most part right now, are still vacant in the hiring process, and my understanding is that those new faculty are anticipated to be on the board really during the fall 2013 term. But those dollars are in the budget. They're earmarked for those positions going forward. My understanding, again, is the 21, approximately 15 of them are instructional faculty, and the remaining 6 are non-instructional faculty. That's in the budget. Moving on, I guess, to the next slide is, again, the key elements. The revenues do include, that $118 million, do include the passage of Prop 30, excuse me. With the passage of Prop 30, Peralta's direct impact is restoring back to our budget approximately $5.5 million. Now, that being said, the way the governor wrote the language on Prop 30 is that it doesn't come in as unrestricted general fund dollars. It has characteristics or similar characteristics of our Measure B parcel tax, in the sense that the governor has made it clear in the language, the ballot language, that this money cannot be used for just anything and everything. The language in the ballot text is that it cannot be used on administrative type activities. Now, we're still trying to get official language from the state chancellor's office and what that means, because it will impact its allocation and the use of that money. But we're waiting for that language to come back, or that direction to come back from the state chancellor's office before fully allocating that money out. Now, some of it has already been allocated out. A little over $1 million has been allocated out to support adjunct faculty or part-time faculty budgets, and has been allocated to the colleges to support really the increase the number of sections to achieve our FTES targets. The budget, again, as I mentioned before, includes 21 new faculty positions that were in some phases of hiring, and then the part-time faculty budgets within the unrestricted general fund have been augmented in addition to the passage of Prop 30, but have been augmented in light of Measure B. Now, the next slide, before I get to Measure B, the parcel tax, speaking to Prop 30, now, this was the ballot measure that was approved in November, and with its passage, we avoided what would have been approximately 7.3% workload reduction. Now, again, it passed, and we're all grateful, particularly grateful for that, because, again, if that would not have passed, it would have had significant cuts, or resulted in significant cuts, because our additional workload reduction cumulatively, I mentioned before, it's already at 10%. It would have went to up to 16% had it not passed again, but thankfully it did. The reduction or the passage also reduced the amount of deferrals or borrowing we have to do for cash flow purposes, and it does provide system-wide, 72 districts in the state, it does provide $50 million for restoring those previous year's workload reductions. Now, again, Peralta's proportionate share of that $50 million that we share with the other 71 districts amounts to about 175 FTES, or about $700,000. Now, the parcel tax fund, next slide, please, is Measure B, parcel tax fund, was approved by voters on June 5th of 2012. It provides an annual special property tax assessment for parcels within our district boundaries, and $48 per year for a duration of eight years. The revenue associated with that is what we've budgeted for, is approximately $7.5 million. Now, the money comes in really peaks and valleys, the timing of which homeowners pay their property taxes. So we receive about half of it approximately in November, December, when property tax owners pay their first installment payment. And then we receive the second piece of it, or the remainder of it, generally in April, when the second installment of property tax payments are due. And the ballot language taken directly from the ballot was maintaining core academic programs such as math, science, English, training students for career, and preparing students to transfers to four-year universities. The next slide shows what's currently been allocated in light of the passage and preparing for the spring term. As Chancellor Ortiz mentioned before, when we started the budget, preparing for the 12-13 budget a year ago, last spring, we proceeded with a very cautious position of assuming that the parcel tax, both the parcel tax and Prop 30, were going to fail. Because of our thin fund balance, or low fund balance, had we budgeted otherwise, it would be setting us up for significant mid-year reductions. Parcel tax passed. We started adding money back to, or started to prepare to add money back to the budgets, and this is really the first phase of this. Most of it, as I mentioned before, has been in the area of adjunct faculty, and again, to support the schedule of classes and the instructions at the four colleges. The other area that has been allocated, or positions allocated, is one instructional aide or instructional assistant has been allocated to each college as well. In addition to that, as Chancellor Ortiz mentioned before, we have started the process to restore the discretionary cuts that were implemented to the colleges during this budget planning process. Just for the colleges, not the district office. So that money will be rolling out hopefully within the next week or two, once we get information back from the colleges on where the colleges, based upon the planning, intend to spend that money. Now, that's discretionary budgets, so we're talking like hourly folks, supplies, materials, equipment, contract services, and so forth. That is not incorporated in these numbers, but it will be, again, as we roll those budgets out to the colleges. And restoring those budgets to the colleges is approximately $1 million. Exact, it's $997,000. So that will be coming out as well. The next slide, the key elements, includes augmentation of part-time faculty, previously mentioned, includes 4 instructional aides. It doesn't also include 1 distance ed position, which I didn't mention on the previous slide, and will include the restoration of discretionary budgets to the colleges. Now, transitioning and speaking to the governor's proposal, and what he has in mind in terms of his initial thoughts on a 13-14 budget, he released his budget last Thursday, and we're still digesting all the nuances that it contains. But again, it's a proposal, and that should always be at the forefront. Very rarely does his proposal look anything like what comes out of that meat grinder of a legislative process. So the key components that deal with us, community colleges, and I'll have some numbers in terms of what it means, potentially means to Peralta. It's useful, good information to understand where the beginning of the discussion is at right now between the governor and the legislature. But I'll provide the highlights, but again, it's the beginning of the discussion, and it's subject to change. So the first component is he's putting on the table, or proposing to put on the table, $196.9 or $197 million worth of additional funds to community colleges. At this time, he has not identified whether he's proposing to have that identified as growth or restoration dollars, funding FTES, or COLA. Essentially, what he's put in his budget proposal is he's leaving that up to the Board of Governors in Sacramento to decide, and more to come on that. Second component is the continuance of buying down our need to borrow for cash flow purposes, buying down our deferral. Right now, our deferral statewide is about $801 million. He's proposing to use $179 million to buy it down even further to $622 million. To go back up, one thing I was remiss in saying is that is probably on the minds of everybody is, okay, well, regardless, on the first bullet point, regardless if it's COLA or growth, what does that mean to Peralta? Well, our proportionate share of those dollars based upon statewide FTS would be about $3.7 million. And again, if that were to come to fruition, that's what it would translate to, but at this time we don't know whether it would come in as growth or COLA. The second one, buying down of deferrals, that doesn't materialize in new dollars for us. It essentially means that we have less money we need to borrow for cash flow purposes. For Peralta, that's approximately about $3.4 million that we would not need to borrow to fund our cash operations. And the last one on the technical side is a provision of $133.2 million in the event that statewide property taxes come in below estimates. The question for us, as you may have related this to a previous slide, is that going to be enough, especially in light of the housing market in the recovery statewide, but there's still pockets of softness. Now, the next slide is the policy proposals. Some of these are new, some of these are not new, but there were about a half a dozen policy proposals that he's putting forward for discussion, but I think these are the three more critical ones that everybody ought to be aware of. He's proposing to put a 90-semester unit cap on the number of units students can take for which the district would be funded. Students who exceed this cap would have to pay the full cost of education. So if I'm a student and I've changed my educational plan a number of times, and I have, say, approximately 100 units, essentially the state would not fund me as that student for taking those additional classes. The student would have to pay the full cost, which right now is interpreted to mean they'd have to pay the out-of-state non-resident rate, which for next year is projected to be about $213 per unit. So that's significant. The second policy proposal he's putting forward is changing our current funding model, which is primarily based upon a census date funding. The census date for the academic terms is about 20% into the term. So at that 20%, they take a snapshot, and we are funded based upon enrollment at that time. He's proposing to change that rather than 20% as funding it who's there at the last day of instruction, so based upon completion. And the last one I'd like to highlight, which I think is interesting, is shifting the adult education component. Historically, that has been with K-12. His proposal right now is to shift that from K-12 to community colleges. That would be allocated to districts in the form of block grants. Right now there's about $300 million that he's identified for that. But the truth be told is that K-12s a few years ago, they were funded for adult ed at a little over $1 billion. So because of the K-12 cuts, they've shifted that money from adult ed to to their primary operations. And so now the governor is saying, well, because of that shift, that there's a need. So community colleges, we're going to place that on your plate, but we're going to give you what remnants are left over, which is about $300 million. So much discussion is going to be had on all three of these, as you probably see. And that's a summary overview. And the last slide is thank you and a welcome back. And my parting comments is, Trustee Galassa said his two favorite moments or two favorite days was the beginning of instruction and the day turning in grades. I come back very happy, not only because of aromatherapy, but because I have three small young kids, a 6, 4, and 2. And after spending 3 weeks on vacation with them, I am very grateful. Don't get me wrong, I love my kids. I am very grateful to be back, no matter how difficult the circumstances may be. And have a newfound appreciation, actually reinforced appreciation and love for my dear wife. Thank you. Oh, you want me to...
Thank you, Ron, for enlightening us on the budget. Very interesting information.